A few years ago, I got to stay at a retreat center in northern England. It was just a few miles south of the border with Scotland on the eastern coast of England. And the retreat center that I went to, it was located in this very old manor house that was originally built as a tower. The manor house was built around it later on, but originally it was a tower to defend against raiding Scottish tribes from the 15th century. What they would do is when they came, all the peasants would hide in the tower and hope for the best. And sometimes the best worked out and sometimes it didn't. The room that I slept in looked modern enough. It had been remodeled, of course. But it probably was built around the time of Columbus. It was at the top of a winding stairway that led to what was called the Peel Tower, which is where archers stood to rain arrows down on these raiders when they would come. And I loved it because you could look out the window and the landscape was just absolutely stunning. There were these beautiful rolling green meadows and hills. They were great for day hikes and just going out to explore. One day we went out on a day hike and my group and I walked to the top of a hill off just to the east of the retreat center. Now it rained every day there, and so it didn't take much more than 100 yards until we were just kind of soaked from about the knee down. We kept walking. After a few miles, towards the top of this hill was a place called Cuthberts Cave. Now Cuthberts Cave, the history behind that is quite a bit older than that tower. It's named after Cuthbert, who is this great English saint who helped bring Christianity to England in the 5th century. And about 100 years after he died, in the 6th century, raiders who weren't coming from the north but from the east, Vikings, raided northern England. Go ahead and pull up Cuthberts Cave on there, Mike. That's Cuthberts Cave. It's not much of a cave, but it just barely counts as a cave. Well, as these Vikings raided northern England and the monks who lived on that coast had to flee, they took the thing that was most precious to them, which were Cuthbert's remains, and they hid them in that cave because they didn't want the Vikings to take them. They were okay with the Vikings taking their silver and their gold, but they weren't okay with losing their saint. It was something too precious to give up, so they hid him in this tiny cave. And then just up from the hill, from the cave, at the pinnacle of the hilltop, was something that was much older than the story behind Cuthbert's Cave. Because up at the top of the hill, when you walk around the corner from Cuthbert's Cave, you'll find a cairn. This is actually the picture of the cairn that we found. And a cairn is just what it looks like. It's a pile of rocks, which is probably not something you go all over the world to go look at, but that's where we were. Cairns are just piles of stone. They can be smaller like this one. It was about 4 feet high and about 10 feet across. They are built all over the world, but they're associated most with Scotland because they're all over the place in Scotland. They were made over time, and when I say that they were old, I mean that they're probably much older. They probably go back well before the time of Jesus. For centuries, it's been a tradition in Scotland for people to carry a rock when they'd walk to the top of a big hill. And so over the centuries, some of these cairns could get very large. They could get to where they were the size of small hills themselves, of these rocks. Other times, men in armies would build cairns all at once by every soldier would bring one stone and leave them in a pile before battle. And after the battle, all of the soldiers who were still standing would come and collect one of those stones and carry it away, which meant that everybody who didn't make it back from that battle left their stone behind, and it was a monument to that battle that happened there. Whatever their purpose is, this cairn, because it's the only one I've ever seen, was intriguing. I was at the top of this big hill. The North Sea was in the background. And it was fun to speculate about why that cairn was there and how it was formed, because the truth is that it was probably old enough to where no one really knew. Whatever its purpose, whatever its origin, it was a place marker. It was a monument that was there long before us, and it'll be around long after us. And even if you don't quite know what you should be remembering, it is a place to remember. In our text today, we see a cairn-worthy event. Jesus brings his closest 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John, up a mountain. They don't really know what's happening. Maybe they're happy to be along for the trip. Maybe they're feeling extra special since all the B-lister disciples all had to be left behind down the hill and they got to go. Whatever's going through their mind, though, they arrive at the top of the mountain and Jesus tells them it's time to pray. Well, praying, as it turns out, is tiresome work. And it doesn't take long before the 3 disciples are starting to doze. Apparently God doesn't really appreciate it when people try to nap through Jesus' special prayer times. And so he decides to put on a show. Just before their eyelids close, Jesus is transformed, or we would say transfigured. His clothes become so dazzling white that they practically glow. His face brightens and changes. It's as strange a scene as there is in the Gospels. Even without the voice from the cloud explaining it, the disciples had no doubt what they were witnessing. It was Jesus of Nazareth, the guy they had always known, the man that they tramped down many a dusty trail with, whose mother and brothers they knew, the one they'd seen as hungry and tired and footsore as the rest of them. But he's more than Jesus of Nazareth in this moment. He's the Messiah. He's the Christ. He's in his glory. This Jesus is new to them. This side of Jesus is new to them. Maybe they finally realized that Jesus was the real deal. Or maybe they thought they'd fallen asleep and this was all a dream. Who knows? Moses and Elijah enter. They talk with Jesus for a moment. And I mean, these are the 2 great figures of the Jewish faith. These are the great lawgiver and the greatest of the prophets. They're the 2 biggest heroes. Imagine Jefferson and Lincoln coming down and having a chat with one of your friends. That still doesn't even really approach the way that this mind-bending experience would have affected the disciples. And poor Peter. He sees what's happening, and understandably, it is a little bit confusing. You ever watched a movie and you can't follow the plot? You're not really sure what's going on? A few weeks ago, I went to a movie that's gotten some really good reviews. And I must say that it was just a little bit over my head. The whole time I watched it, I was basically 5 minutes behind what was going on in the plot line, just struggling to keep up. And afterwards, I had coffee with the people that I'd gone to see the movie with, and they're talking about it and what it means. And the whole time I thought to myself, I better not say anything, because if I do, they're going to know exactly how dumb I am. I'm not even going to tell you guys what movie it was, because I don't want you to have seen it and think, oh my gosh, I can't believe you didn't understand when so-and-so did this. Well, in Peter's case, he's watching this event unfolding right before his eyes, and he doesn't get it. And unfortunately, he's not the kind of person to keep his mouth shut when he doesn't get what's happening in the movie. He's going to start talking and just kind of fake it and hope that it helps him out along the way. So he says, hey, Jesus, let's build a little temple here for you and Moses and Elijah. Let's construct some cairns for you. A place where we can come back and remember. Peter's already got architects lined up to design it. He's already looking forward to the day when he can bring his grandchildren back and say, this is the spot where Jesus brought Elijah and Moses down to meet us. God bless him, he's the kind of person that hates to leave a dumb thing left unsaid. But his heart's in the right place, and you can't be too hard on him. He has experienced something that is so vivid and so close. He's experienced God on a level that surpasses anything he ever has experienced. What's so bad about that? Why not build a little cairn, a little marker of remembrance? I mean, Peter, all he wants is to stay up in the heights of that experience. You ever felt like that? You ever been on a spiritual high and you want to hold on to it? You see, for Peter, when it comes to his spirituality, what he wants is a ladder. Good tall one, too. Couldn't find the short one. I think I'm going to tie my shoes before I start because one of them feels a little loose. this sermon could go awry real quick. There, that's better. This is why I'm not wearing my robe today, by the way. Because robes and ladders. What Peter wants is to stay up in that spiritual high. Wants to stay up here, close to God. Ever had a mountaintop experience? Maybe it was at church camp. Maybe you went to a revival when you were young. You can remember some preacher. Maybe you can remember a preacher here at this church or some other church that you can remember that really inspired you. But many of us have these moments in life where we experience God in a way that's close and real. It's not unlike what's happening to Peter. When I was a senior in high school, I went to a church camp. And we were in our chapel. This is at Sacramento Methodist Assembly, for those of you who grew up in New Mexico Conference. In the chapel, I knew Joni remembered Sacramento. And, everything was perfect. The music was beautiful in the background. All of my friends and spiritual mentors were there. It was this perfect mountaintop experience. I think my Christian walk probably got serious in that moment. It was a beautiful time. Peter's having a moment like that. He wants to hold on to it. Jesus wants to move on. It's happened. It's beautiful. It's good. But it's not why he's there. See, the problem with being up here is that you can't help many people from up here. Not much you can do. This ladder, it's great. This is kind of a cool perspective to see, y'all. But there's not much I can do. I can go up, I can go down. If I try to go to either side, my options are pretty limited. Jesus' options would be pretty limited up there. In fact, really the Jesus story is him starting up here and coming down to us. Jesus knows why he's really here and what's just a distraction. Peter wants to build his temple. It's a good thing Jesus convinced him not to, because we see in the story of Luke, if you read on the verses ahead, they get down the mountain and it says on the next day, a man brought his son. His son has fits. They say he has a spirit. And he has these fits and he starts foaming at the mouth all the time. Father's terrified. When we read this, maybe it's demon possession. When I read it, it sounds to me a lot like the symptoms for epilepsy. Whatever it is, it's serious. On the day after they get back, if Peter had prevailed, they'd be up on that mountain, building some shrine, would have missed this son and his father. Would have missed an opportunity to do what Jesus really came to do. Mountaintops are great. What we do together in a worshipful way is great. When we come together on Sunday mornings, it's great. But is it possible to get so wrapped up in them that we miss what's at the bottom of the mountain? Jesus came down. That should lead us down. There's a preacher and a civil rights leader who I got to meet a few times because he's based in Dallas, called Zan Wesley Holmes. And I remember him saying once that Christianity is a come-and-go event. We come to worship and we go to serve. This is a good thing that we're doing here. But if it doesn't lead us off the ladder, then it's all a bunch of bells and smells and other wastes of time. Because Jesus' spirituality isn't defined by a ladder. Jesus' spirituality is designed by a doorway. It's shaped around a doorway. Because Jesus sees That He came down not to spend a bunch of time in the holy places, in the holy times, but to go to the places that aren't that holy. The places out there. The places where there are sons who need to be healed of epilepsy. To go to the places where there are people imprisoned because they're being persecuted. He's here to go to the places where no one else wants to be. And ultimately, we don't see His glory in its purest form up on the Transfiguration. Transfiguration Sunday is not the holiest day in the Christian calendar. We see His glory in a few weeks. March 31st, Easter Sunday. We see His glory on the cross. And on the empty cross. That's where Jesus' glory lies. And that's where we ought to be too if we want to be a part of that. Not up on a ladder. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.